Hello there, Mandy here. Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart is not just a podcast. It's also a book, a free online grief group, and a one-on-one private coaching practice. If you are interested in learning more, visit mandykapehart.com to find out how restorative grief can help you heal heart, mind, body, and spirit. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 253, titled The Sediment of Untouched Sorrow with Frances Weller. We don't always think about grief as an invitation. We're often taught to see it as something that happens to us, something we must manage, recover from, or eventually move beyond. But what if grief is also a way of staying connected? What if it actually has something to teach us about what we love, what we've lost, and what it means to belong in a world that is constantly changing? Today, we're spending some time with these questions and the idea of becoming an apprentice to sorrow with my guest and one of my favorite authors on the subject, Frances Weller, whose writing and teachings have invited so many of us to reconsider our relationship to grief, ritual, community, and the living world. Through his earlier works and now an audiobook titled Apprenticeship with Sorrow, Frances has spent decades asking what might happen when we stop trying to grieve alone. I'm so grateful you're here for this conversation. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. I'm your host, Mandy, and today I have the great honor of talking with someone whose work has deeply shaped the way that I understand grief and do this work with you, that so many of those around me understand grief, and learning through his work that it's not just something we move through and leave behind, but something we must learn to live alongside with one another. Frances Weller is the author of The Wild Edge of Sorrow, The Wild Edge of Sorrow Workbook, The Absence of the Ordinary, and his newest work, An Apprenticeship with Sorrow. Frances, thank you so much for being here with me today. Welcome to Restorative Grief.
Well, thanks for having me, Mandy. I'm delighted to be in spaces that have come to honor the whole journey around grief. So thank you for doing what you're doing.
Yeah, of course. I think what I love so much about your work is you can see the line of consistency over the body of your work is just a life spent thinking and becoming curious about grief and how we move through it. What is it about this particular area of our lived experience that keeps drawing you back in?
There's something about that is so transparently authentic, that when someone's in grief, you're not asking them, hey, how you doing? You can feel it. And when we are allowed to communally share it, it generates a field of intimacy and connectivity that is really difficult to get to just at the grocery store. So there's something that when we share our sorrows, that actually reinforces and deepens our connections to one another, but also to this extraordinary world, because that's also part of our grief. And yeah.
Yeah, that connective tissue between us feels so tender on a normal day, in a normal, life experience, if we can call any of it normal. And what I loved about your most recent audiobook, The Apprenticeship with Sorrow, just the tonality of recognizing we are sitting as learners. What does it actually mean to become an apprentice to sorrow and not just someone who says, "Oh, I'm aware of grief. I know about the 5 stages. I know about sadness." What does an apprenticeship truly look like?
Well, first of all, it understands that grief is not something that occurs and then passes. An apprenticeship recognizes that grief is going to be around us every day in some form or another. In fact, much of the grief that we feel and experience isn't personal. It actually is communal. It actually belongs to the watersheds, to our species, to all the things that are suffering. We feel it on some level. It registers in our body. If we are unskilled at that, then we have to turn away from that grief because it's too much. So what the apprenticeship is really is about fortifying and deepening our capacities I often say that grief is not just an emotion, but a core human faculty. And we receive almost no education in this faculty. So when grief inevitably comes, which it will, which it does, we get overwhelmed. We don't know how to respond, and then we have to shut down. So the apprenticeship is really a long vigil. I like the term because it implies time. In the old language of apprenticeship, you apprenticed for like 5 years, 10 years, sometimes 15 years to a master craftsperson. And at the end of that long devotional practice, you yourself become a master craftsperson. In the language of soul, the apprenticeship with sorrow doesn't lead to mastery, it actually ripens us into elderhood. So there's a deepening that comes with this apprenticeship that slowly metabolizes our personal encounters with sorrow into something we could say is almost nutrient dense for the community.
I love
And
that.
I become a place, a refugia, to use a lovely term that I come across recently, for other people's sorrows. Because an elder, an apprentice, someone who's undertaken that apprenticeship, is not afraid of other people's grief or the world's grief. That's why they are called elders. They have that capacity to stay present in the midst of the storm and not turn away from the young ones who are overwhelmed with sorrow right now. They know how to stay and hold their ground. And that's what I love about grief work is that it does prepare us to become, hopefully, responders to the sorrows of the world.
It's so much more than being a witness for someone, which in my younger experience in the work that I'm doing, that has been such a primary educational point for people is, hey, let me teach you how to be a witness for those around you. How does one go from witnessing and remaining as a witness for others while tending their own grief work into a state of recognizing, oh, this is an apprenticeship. This, every time I sit as a witness, I'm interpreting and understanding and sharpening my skill set.
Well, I think the core thing is that we have a capacity to respond to that grief rather than just trying to pacify it, smooth it over. We actually encourage a movement deeper into that other person's sorrow. And that's one of the contexts that we would talk about that in is ritual space. That in that ground, in that space that we create and build together, the invitation is to descend, is to go down into the material, to engage the material. Again, our Western idea is how do I endure this? How do I get to the other side of it? But from soul's perspective, it is how do I go deeper into it? And that's always been a communal and always been a ritual ground. It's never been private. It's never been individualized. It's never been, just clinically adapted to. The invitation has always been towards a descent. In many, many traditions that I've studied, when someone's in the state of acute grief, that's their work for the next year. Their job is to undertake that descent into the underworld and be remade in that space, undone, first of all, like a caterpillar, just kind of broken apart by grief, and then remade in the midst of that long, again, that liminal journey. And then the return is part of what we also need to fortify in people so that when they come back from this long time in the underworld, we're there to receive them and to help, I don't know, give direction to what they're bringing back to us, because we come back with gifts from that long descent, right? I've seen that so many times that people who have said yes to this come back changed and more capable of being part of a living culture.
Yeah. So that's an interesting point you just made that for those who've said yes to this understanding of the depth they need to explore or get the opportunity to explore during that first season of acute grief, however long it is lasting for them. I think there is uh, and you named it as well, a Western perspective that it must be done individually, like the hero going on their journey, right? And I think we get really lost in that to the degree that we forget what it looks like to bring people along, the guides to come with us, even in that acute season. How
Hmm.
would you encourage someone who is fresh in their acute loss and able to say yes, right? There are the folks that are not able to say yes, and we can touch on that too. But for those who are able to say yes, what does it look like for them to invite others along the journey with them?
There's a recognition that in order to move grief, which is the intention of it, it's not meant to be a, static rock in our heart.
Mm.
It's meant to be kept moving. So two things are required, containment and release. Well, what I've seen is that you can't do both jobs by yourself. I can't both be a container for grief and release it at the same time. So I end up becoming a permanent containment field. And what we end up typically doing is just recycling grief, typically for generations. I mean, much of the grief I'm feeling isn't mine. It's generations old, hundreds and hundreds of years old. But if I don't have a containment field, then I just have to keep spinning it and then passing it on, you know. So if you're saying yes to this, you recognize that I need to be held in these moments. I can't contain myself. I need a container. I need people who can just sit with me, not fix me, not give me advice, not try to make it better, but just sit in that space with me. Touch me if I need touching, hand me a Kleenex or whatever. But they're there to help hold the space. And your job is then reduced down to one thing, which is to release. And again, I've seen that close to 100 times when I've led grief rituals is people are aching for the permission to do that one job only, just to release grief and not also have to hold it together, not burden other people for God's sake. That's just the worst thing you can do, right?
Who would think?
I know it's just almost like an offensive thing to let somebody see that I'm actually struggling. I'm in pain. I'm heartbroken. And that's what we want to be able to declare.
I mean, I think you nailed very beautifully why so many of us kind of lose connection with our communities when we go into sorrow, because there is no um, comfort with the uncomfortable, or there's a severe lack of skill of sitting in discomfort and understanding that liminal space is necessary. How would you encourage someone who is like recognizing, whoa, the people around me are not the ones who can go through this with me? How do I invite people in? Where do I look? Because the online communities are rich and vast, but also very overwhelming. And there's so many directions to go. I wonder, for those who feel very isolated in their grief, what you would encourage them to do in their immediate environments.
I'm hoping that whomever is listening has at least one friend, maybe even two, and to invite them over to your house and say that on Friday night, I want to talk about loss. I just want to open up that door. But again, let's make some agreements. We're not here to fix anything. Please, no advice. Let's just bear witness to the truth that we walk around with every day and almost have no place ever to declare it. So on Friday night, we're gonna talk about loss and begin, the process of challenging some of the collective conditioning around staying in control, smiling, and be happy. Not bad things, obviously, but when it's a covering over what really is aching to be seen and held. So basically we're just trying to grant each other permission just to say what's on our hearts, because I don't know anybody right now who is not deeply affected by what's happening on our planet, in our communities, to our children, to the salmon, to the forests right, as they burn, and all the creatures who are struggling, suffering from that. That's in our bodies, and we need to have some place to take it. Otherwise, we end up, I wrote about how in my practice, which I've retired from, but people would come in and say, I'm really struggling with depression. And I listen, and that really, ultimately, it's not depression, it's oppression. It's the sediment of untouched sorrow, again, from generations that have just kind of weighed us down to the point where we can barely get out of bed. It's so heavy and so dense. And again, what we're waiting for is that permission to begin to set it down. It's not like we ever empty the cup, but we can get a lot less weighty from the untouched sorrows.
That collective grief in our bodies is something that I think we are conscious of on little areas of life, like you were saying with the way the world around us, even nature. My husband will mow the lawn and apologize to the bees for cutting down the clover, knowing it will come back in a day or two, but his awareness of it leads him to say, I'm with you. I know this is hard, and I will allow it to grow as long as I can, with the awareness of, okay, but can I balance the sorrow of our neighborhood saying mow your lawn, and the frustration of the interwoven, all of the layers of our experience, silly or otherwise, make that need for being direct and moving away from expectations and into agreements with the people we trust, even if we're not sure we trust them yet,
Mm-hmm.
to test the waters. They make that so necessary. And I think that's a really beautiful way to bring someone in to say, I need to be real clear. I am hurting. I suspect you are also hurting. And maybe you're not. And that's okay. Maybe you're not ready to say it. Those hidden griefs are really scary.
Mm-hmm.
But to be able to say, I want to present myself as a safe person, I'm going to trust that you can be there too. It would be deeply transformative, I think, for even three people to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. It is. And that's like when people came into my practice, I said, this is a good place to learn how to tolerate contact in this very vulnerable territory of grief. But ultimately, you'll need a much larger holding space for this to move along. Because psychically, the way that we're designed and our long inheritance puts something deep in us that is waiting for those signal frequencies to be activated. So when we are in ritual space, you see something happening that does not happen, like I say, at the grocery store. Something gets quickened inside what I call the archaic psyche, the ones that were shaped over 300 or 400,000 years. That's the frequency I'm waiting for. To have 30 or 40 people in a room all willing to go into this space together, to be side by side, weeping together, howling, expressing outrage. That's the frequency that we've been waiting for. But we live in a, smiley face world and a have it all together world. And we also have this kind of underlying fear about showing ourselves too vulnerably to the world because our sense of belonging is so tenuous frequently that it's based on performance, not on essence.
Yeah.
And when we're working with grief, we're talking about essence. We're not talking about having your shit together. We're talking about letting it fall apart, you know. Um, a very different agreement comes when ritual is stirred.
You've really landed on something I have found personally challenging in my own grief work, but also in my professional life, knowing that I am willing to confront vulnerability and to extend vulnerability, and to also say, oh, that wasn't vulnerable, that was curated, let me try that again. I find that I am consistently faced with beloved people who are not sure they can survive the intensity of vulnerability or of expressing their grief. What would you say to someone who's listening and says, oh, I can see the value in it, but I also don't know how to come back out of it? It's so much more than I don't think I'll ever stop crying, and so I don't want to start. it goes much deeper into their psyche and maybe ego and self-protection. But what would you say to that person to encourage them? Hey, let's try it.
Well, I would give them a sense of learning how to titrate. We tend to think it's either push it away or drown in it. And again, that's part of the apprenticeship. The first step of the apprenticeship is coming into right relationship with grief. So you're seeing it more as a companion rather than something you're drowning in or trying to keep outside the door. But you're walking with this. You're walking with this kin that will be with you every day for the rest of your life. Be good to have some kind of friendship with it. So the first thing I try to teach people is how to step in and step out. So we do writing practice, or we do a ritual, or we do something that they can step in and then they can step out. Write for 10 minutes, or start writing just for 5 minutes about a thread around sorrow, and then step out and see if you survive.
Hmm.
I mean, as you said, I think quite well, there's so much fear that if I go into that territory, I'm just going to disappear.
Hmm.
People would say to me, if I go there, I'm never coming back. And I would say to them, if you don't go there, you're never coming back.
Hmm.
That there's a part of our psychic life that's so invested in keeping this at bay that we're, in a sense, postponing our aliveness, by trying to maintain our okayness, to the world. So I think learning how to come into a relationship that you actually have some capacity in relationship to your grief. I've never seen anybody completely just disappear in grief,
Hmm.
ever. I've seen them be very deeply moved by the loss, as we all can be. But there's also a part of us that knows that we're still here, you know.
I'm hearing you put grief and life in the same um, on the same path as I might put happy and sad. I might put gratitude and disappointment. I'm hearing that paradox so beautifully expressed, and it's so jarring, I think, for people who are like, what do you mean I can be grateful and grieve at the same moment? They're dead. Why would I be grateful for that? What do you see happening when people allow those two experiences to come side by side?
Ripening. I
Mm.
mean, I often say that the mark of a mature human being is the capacity to carry grief in one hand and gratitude in the other, and to be stretched large by these two things.
Yeah.
I mean, if I only pick up grief, in short order, my heart will turn bitter and I will close down and I will withdraw from the world. If I only pick up gratitude, I lack a certain depth of compassion for other people's sorrows. But together, they make the prayer of life. There are what we are encountering every day at the same time. I can go drive to Santa Rosa and obviously almost inevitably come across a dead, you know, squirrels for sure, foxes, raccoons, and my heart aches for those deaths. And then I look up and I see, Mount, St. Helena, and it's stunning, and the light on it is gorgeous. And which one's real?
Mm.
To the heart, that's the in-breath and out-breath. It is, our innate capacity to hold complexities. So I think you may remember the story I told of working with a woman in my office one day, and she was literally on the floor sobbing about the Gulf War. This is the first Gulf War back in whatever that was, 90 something. And I let her cry for like 15, 20 minutes. I just sat and just held space for her. Then I leaned in at one point and I said, "Did you happen to notice the plum blossoms were out?" And she looked up and said, "No." I said, "Did you happen to notice the mustard is in full bloom?" She said, "No." I said, "We can't possibly tolerate the horrors of the Iraq War without plum blossoms and mustard blooms. You know, the heart has to have that capacity to be touched by beauty, by kindness, by friendship, by love, by tenderness, and at the same time be able to unflinchingly look at the horrors of the world. And both of them are absolutely essential for our capacity to do that, you know?
Yeah, that both and approach to the unsure griever can feel so much like bypassing. And I know in my own experience, I was involved in the evangelical church for quite some time, and there was such a significant experience of bypassing for me, knowing I understand you're trying to encourage me and drive me back to faith practices, but you're saying to do it instead of, in place of feeling how I feel, in place of allowing sorrow. And I know that there are a lot of people listening who really struggle with, we'll say, funeral services for that purpose specifically. There's always a but instead of an and. How would you encourage someone to notice the and when they're surrounded by all of the buts? What a question.
Well, it's a good question because what we encounter is how much we live in an ascension culture.
Mm,
We like things rising. We like things going up. We love resurrection. We love ascension. We love those things. What we're not familiar with is the descent, the going down. And what we talk about around soul and grief is that that is a movement of descent. And we get really uncomfortable when things go down. We are always struggling to try to keep things up, our moods, all kinds of things that we want to keep going up. But what soul is asking us is to learn the holiness of the descent. Rainer Maria Rilke, that Austrian poet, said, and yet, no matter how deeply I go down into myself, my God is dark and like a webbing made of 100 roots that drink in silence. So he's reclaiming darkness and the descent as holy ground. Oscar Wilde said something very similar. Where there is sorrow, there is holy ground. So we're learning to become a little bit less afraid and to build faith. I mean, if you want to talk about faith, I want to build faith in grief, that it's not there to take you hostage. It's there to ripen you as a human being, and to call forward your greatest capacities to show up for your family, for your friends, for your neighborhood, for your community, for your watershed, you know.
I think, the way you're speaking of it reminds me of the idea of the long dark, and not necessarily feeling like someone would say, oh, I can't get out of it, but really just noticing that as that experience of darkness feels less scary, feels less overwhelming or unending, it also becomes less dark. Like I think about when I'm in the night and my vision adjusts and suddenly I'm seeing things that were always there, but it's my time spent in the dark, opening my eyes, trusting that I am safe, trusting that I will be again once in the light, that I begin to notice things that I might have missed that end up being integral. Stars.
Yeah. I mean, the beauty and the value of darkness. I mean, think about your heartbeat right now,
Mm.
happening in utter darkness.
Yeah. If that
Everything
was
I'm,
exposed to the light, we would have a problem.
this is right. That's right. I mean, everything I'm seeing out my window, the redwood trees, the bay trees, they're there because of what's happening underground.
Yeah.
They're there because of what's happening in the darkness. And we have been in a very binary position in this culture where light and up are good, dark and down are bad. And unless we reclaim down and dark as holy, we're going to continue to be in big trouble,
Yeah.
racially, and in terms of the relationship we have with the earth. There's something very essential about this education that we're going through in the long dark of being taken down into the underworld, into the darkness, where we learn about patience, about humility, about deep listening, about restraint. There's this wonderful term, I think I wrote about it in the new book called Kartsaluni. And Kartsaluni comes out of the Inuit tradition from the north of the Arctic Circle. And the word literally translates sitting quietly together in the darkness, waiting expectantly for something creative to burst forth. And these were the whaling people. They couldn't go out and hunt the whale until they received a song from the whale people. And so they had to sit quietly together in the darkness and wait. Now, that's not a very American approach. We want something, we go out and get it, we take it. But what the darkness is inviting is patience and restraint, waiting, waiting. Be given something before you take it, honor it. Do the things that are required of us in the darkness. So I think the long dark is a prolonged period of correction, of reckoning, where we're being asked to look at some of the things that we've justified for centuries: capitalism, colonialism, racism. We've justified these things
Yeah.
for centuries. And this is a time of reckoning where those things are unsustainable to people, to the planet, to the species, to everything. And so, in this long dark of time and descent, which will be keynoted by grief, we are being taken through a rough initiation as a species. And my prayer is that we listen to this invitation and do the hard work of becoming worthy of being, good participants in this extraordinary experience of being on this planet.
You're describing this invitation to drop our facade of control in such a
Yes,
beautiful way. We've got this lovely idea that we have control over anything,
right.
including ourselves, which to me makes me laugh every time I, remember, well, a neurodivergent mind doesn't have a whole lot of control anyway. So it becomes um, almost a challenge of, are you okay being just human? Are you okay being myopic in the grand scheme of the universe? Are you okay letting ego sit aside so that you can experience the universe itself, the individualistic moments of joy, and then the collective that celebrates that joy with you? I think that addiction to control is ultimately the thing that really offends us about grief. It's the ultimate, the hell you do. You don't have control over anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's well
Mm.
said.
Yeah. I'm just curious, what are you still learning about grief after all these years of sitting with people and moving them through community and ritual? What still surprises you about what you learn and do?
The thing that's evolving out of it now is I gave a talk last October to the Minnesota Men's Conference. The talk was called "At the Heart of All Our Sorrows," and it was a talk about white emptiness. How my ancestral tradition, Northern European tradition, lost its living culture and consequently began to substitute artificial culture, capitalism, colonialism, all the things we just talked about. They became the substitutions for living culture, for actually feeling connected to land base and language and rituals and story and traditions and ancestors and all the things that go into a traditional people. That got wiped out by two successive invasions, the Roman invasion and then the Christian invasion. And so that living rootstock got severed. And we have been lifting and living without roots for about almost 2,000 years. And in its place came all of these other symptoms that we now in the West value: power, prestige, rank, privilege, wealth. We don't see those as symptoms. We see those as values.
Yeah.
And if you're really, aggressive and, do it you're going to get to the top of that ladder.
Yeah.
As if individualistic success is the epitome of what it means to be human, rather than collaborative success, cultural success. So, what I'm working with now is how much grief is underneath all of those activities.
Mhm.
And if we really began to explore capitalism and consumption, we would see how much they are attempts to fill the void, to fill the emptiness. You know, I read a statistic recently that it would take 1.5 or 1.9 Earths a year now to satisfy the global population around all the things that we need to survive. But if we all lived according to the United States, it would take 4.5 Earths. So, what is happening here? What could possibly explain this kind of epidemic of consumption that used to be a disease? We would call it, oh, they've got the consumption. You ever hear that term?
Yeah, oh yeah.
So now we have the consumption,
Yeah.
and we're literally consuming ourselves out of a sustainable planet. But will we stop? No, because we're not willing to look at the emptiness. We're not willing to fall into the hole of our own grief and speak about and share and do ritual around the rupture that we're living in. We're just magnifying the rupture and passing it around now and seeing it as a global initiative to get everyone to become capitalistic and everyone to consume as much as they can so we can make more profits. And so that's really the grief I'm looking at right now. And it's an intense one. It's very intense looking at white emptiness. But everywhere I've talked about it, people have been responding saying that is a piece we have not looked at.
Yeah, I can, even as you're describing it, I'm resonating as a mom with a young middle schooler and my own life growing up in the 80s and 90s and recognizing like where I picked up on these habits. And I can hear in the back of my mind, oh, I'm just doing a little retail therapy. I'm just doing a little um,
Hmm.
spa day. And that means hundreds of dollars spent to comfort. We've almost, and I'm guilty of this myself in my work, we've almost said like, okay, the antidote to that is accessible self-care, which to some degree it is, right? Self-care meaning take a nap, take a breath, drink a water. If it's accessible to all, then it counts as self-care. If you can tend to the body, if you can tend to the things. But I'm hearing such a deeper invitation in what you're describing because it goes beyond saying, well, I'm not going to support big companies because when we're all pursuing power, 5 people get rich and the rest of us make sure they do. I'm hearing I'm going to actually reduce, not down to an exquisitely unsustainable, minimalistic life. I'm not going to have just a single pencil that I carry through this world, but I might have only 3. And I might tell my child, you don't need new school supplies because we still have working school supplies. You don't need brand new clothes. We just need clothes that fit and are clean and look okay, that feel comfortable. And that's not a mark against your value. That is a mark of your wisdom. That is a mark of your beauty and the way you are willing to show up in the world, not to say, notice me, but to say, notice yourselves, notice where you feel lack. And can you look a little deeper to show up in that space and be kind to yourself? And of course, that's way too much for a middle schooler to explore and understand. But as a parent, I do feel a stronger call right now to recognize, well, where's my role in that part, in that dismantling of the retail therapy or whatever dopamine hit I'm looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's again the very important. I mean, the soul is not opposed to pleasure,
Right.
for sure. What I'm thinking is the not the antidote, but the maybe just the corrective is to begin to identify what I call primary satisfactions. Singing together, sharing ritual spaces together, laughing together, taking a walk in nature, checking out the stars at night, sharing stories with your friends, sharing a meal. The primary satisfactions are the satisfactions that shaped us over that 400,000 year journey. We wouldn't have survived if we didn't figure it out. We wouldn't be here having this conversation if we hadn't succeeded in understanding what is it that this human being needs in order to flourish,
Mhm.
to become itself most fully articulated. Well, those are the primary satisfactions. Starlit nights, stories, elders, communal gatherings. Tonight we're going to go and hear the old ones. They're going to start telling these stories again. They're crazy stories. Let's go listen. And we want to hear those things, but we go watch TV. We go to our secondary satisfactions again: power, rank, privilege, wealth. Distractions, addictions. Those things never satisfy us. I mean, I've worked with a lot of wealthy people, and they keep telling me I don't have enough. I mean, I need more. Just they don't satisfy. No addict will ever say that they're satisfied. They always want more of something that they don't need. But when you're inside primary satisfaction, like when we're gathering for a ritual weekend, suddenly the psyche begins to recognize, oh, wait a minute, this is what I've been waiting for. This is the village setting. We're singing together, we're sharing meals together, we're sharing dreams in the morning, we're dancing together, we're crying, and we're holding each other. That's what we expected. That's what we expected. And when we have those things, we don't give a shit about the next cell phone. We don't care about, the next episode of so and so's on TV. They don't matter. And I often say that I think the entire economic system would collapse in a day if we were paying attention to primary satisfactions. Because we're not out there trying to buy our way to happiness. We're in it. We are primarily satisfied. Yeah.
I had the privilege of being with family this last week and at a cabin on a lake in the woods. And we hadn't been up for quite a few years. And so being there was special in itself. But we were sitting one night around the campfire with my kiddo and my cousins and their children. And we started telling stories. And my brain blanked. I couldn't think of a single story. So I started recounting a Bluey episode as best I could remember. And they were all wrapped with attention, thinking I was the two grannies. And my friend and I got on a bus dressed like old grannies. And one of them turned and goes, "Is this just a Bluey story?" I'm like, "I'm so sorry. I couldn't think of anything to tell you that wasn't scary because there's littles here." And they giggled and said, "That was the best story, though. That was so good." They talked about it for the rest of the evening, how it was such a funny story to tell. And I thought, this is the childhood that I
Mm-hmm.
want them to remember, sitting around a
Mm-hmm.
campfire,
Right.
fighting off bugs, eating s'mores, and recounting ridiculous stories that
Right.
make us
Yeah.
enjoy each other.
There you go.
But we
That's
lose sight
primary
of it so
satisfactions.
easily. Oh, so
And you
beautiful.
weren't, yeah, and you weren't wondering what was on TV that night. You were
Yeah.
you were inside of something rich and satisfying to the
Yeah.
soul.
Yeah. In all fairness, we were wondering when the next World Cup game was, but that's just because it was in the middle of it. And we had some more soccer fans there, but
Uh-huh.
you're right. I would argue soccer is a primary
I think so
sport,
too.
I think.
Yeah.
Um, Francis, we barely spoke of your beautiful books, and I think you brought the heart of it so wonderfully through this conversation nonetheless. But if anyone is interested and has not, for some reason, read any of your work yet, where can they find more about you and what you are putting into the world, including if you're talking again anytime soon, where they can come and hear you?
The best way to stay in touch is through my website, francisweller.net. And all the books are listed there, but you can get them in your local bookstores, anywhere online. So I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me, Mandy.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. It's been an honor. Thank you for listening to episode 253 of Restorative Grief. This conversation with Francis was beyond my expectations. It's one I've considered and wanted to have for years, thanks to his unique understanding of that interconnectedness of life, grief, and the world at large. Talking through the stories about our culture and what it teaches us about grief and the ways we become isolated in our pain is the only way we can reconnect with one another. And it is how we make room in our lives for ritual, community, and to understand the many types of loss that we carry. If this was your first time listening to the podcast, I'm so grateful that you are here, and I would love for you to subscribe to the show and listen to future episodes as well. Leave a 5-star review so others can find us, and consider becoming a patron of the work. Patrons receive monthly bonus episodes, in addition to workbooks to go along with every one of these conversations and essays to help you deepen your own grief practice. Thank you to the patrons who are with me right now. You are changing the world right at my side. And as always, before we go, one last thing. Please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.